All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's video. Today, I'm going to be talking with my friend, Tori, who is a clinical herbalist, a amazing herbal remedy maker, formulator, and just all around homesteader, amazing badass who I love very much. Hi, Tori.
Hello.
Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna hop right into it because I feel like whenever someone starts making herbal remedies for the first time, they get really excited and maybe they feel like selling herbal remedies is something that they can do, or they start getting pressure from people around them to start making and selling herbal remedies. Um, and so, yeah, how long have you been selling herbal products?
So I think it's been around 4.5, 5 years. That said, that first year was much different than the rest of the years. I definitely started out like cash with friends and things. So I've only had a website, I think about 3 years, but um, did a
Mhm.
lot of markets and a lot of like in-person things before that.
Yeah. So the recording cut off a little
Oh,
bit
sorry.
when you when you started talking. So how long have you been selling herbal remedies? I'm sorry, that's the part that cut off.
4.5 to 5 years.
Okay.
I want to say it's probably been 5 years, but that first year was like here and there. It wasn't the goal right away.
Yeah. So you didn't start off with a website. You just were selling at local markets and selling to friends and family.
Yeah. And it wasn't even really something that I never was like, I'm going to start a business. I had started making my first product, developing my first product, which is now Moon Cycle Sync, when I was trying to navigate endometriosis. And when I started getting close to perfecting it and it was really working for me, that's when like close friends started asking if they could try it or recommending it to their friends. And I definitely at first was just kind of giving extra stuff away. And then it got to a point where it was like, okay, now I'm making more for people. I've got to start charging something for this.
Mhm.
And then that slowly turned into a friend of mine who owned a business, asking if she could sell the products in her store. And that definitely jump started me being like, wow, okay, let me figure out how to like make a label and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I did not have a website until a friend of mine saw me struggling and was like, this would be so much easier if every sale that you made did not have to be a conversation in a message and people could just click checkout. And that
Mhm.
changed everything.
Oh yeah. Um, Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I recommend with people is if you are making herbal products for yourself and your family and you see like you really can vouch for them and you see them working and you're getting reviews and you're getting interest, and you've developed a relationship with these plants that you are making, that you are making herbal remedies with, then I don't know. I prefer that to someone just being like, oh, herbal stuff is so hot right now. I'm just going to make these salves and sell them?
Yeah, that's always really a bummer for me to see, people who maybe saw a recipe online, made that recipe for themselves to try out, and then was like, that was pretty easy. I think I'm gonna make a bunch more of these and sell them. I think that that is a bummer, not just because it's looking at how you can make money off of herbalism, which of course you do get to that point where that's important, but you're also skipping so many valuable lessons. For example, when your first remedy is a whole recipe that you found online, you are, like you said, not really developing a relationship with each plant. And when
Mhm.
I first started learning formulating, I would try one ingredient at a time. So for that moon cycle sync tincture, I made all these individual tinctures and I would try each of those tinctures out. And then how moon cycle sync became formulated was which of those all worked, kind of coming together, which ones work together, etc. And it's interesting because now I feel like that's one of the questions I get the most is, how did you learn to formulate? Well, that's how, like, you have to learn the herbs first, or of course you're not going to know how.
Yeah, and I feel like this is already gonna kind of be like a bandwagony thing, and I feel bad for, anyone who wasn't prepared for this, but like having a relationship with those plants and having a relationship with wherever you're harvesting those plants from or wherever you're getting them from, or the growers of those plants. I feel like that's another thing that makes the products that you make super special, is because you put so much thought into every single thing, from the alcohol to the olive oil to the glycerin to the water to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also huge for me is, I think, again, if you're looking at this as, ooh, I can make money off of this thing, then your brain is automatically going to just find ingredients as cheap as possible. When,
Yeah.
if you're coming into this because you're making remedies for yourself or your loved ones, or, just really caring about the people on the other end, then you want that utmost quality that you would want for yourself. And then not only that, but when I first started out, I was primarily harvesting plants myself, whether I was foraging them or growing them myself. And to me, that became part of the medicine of a, formulation, is taking a tincture and remembering harvesting those wild dog roses with Augustine, or getting the mimosa flower from Harpeth Moon Farms, and what that day was like and what the weather was like and the rain of my area having nourished those plants. And so when I had to make the decision to, scale up and start sourcing from farms, I still wanted that to be a part of the, final medicine of something. And I think the integrity of a product that you're taking is so incredibly important. If you're getting discolored, no scent herbs that have been dried in a warehouse somewhere for years, compared to this beautiful, fresh, vibrant plant that was grown organically and intentionally from a farmer that you know and love, and that you get to help support their dream, that is really a huge difference. So all of
Mhm.
those things matter so much to me.
Yeah, and obviously not everything like that is going to be accessible to folks, but I really think it makes a difference, when pursuing selling things. And then, for someone like me, I make several herbal remedies at home. And when I share about them, most of the time I share about them with the intention of, and I mean sharing locally, right, amongst my friends and family on social media. I'm sharing with the intention of inspiring people to make these things themselves. And so many times people are just like, oh, I want to do it. Can you just like make it for me and I'll buy it? And so sometimes, if I'm making a shea butter for myself or a salve for myself, then I'll make enough extra to share with other people. But
Yeah.
most of the times I'm just like, no, this is something that you can do yourself. I want to show you how to do it yourself. And then now if we're getting into herbal like purchasing, and then one of the great things about um our friendship and getting to know you better is that when I'm not in the mood to make,
Yeah.
then I already have someone who's put so much thought and intention into making an herbal remedy. And that's what to me herbal products should be like, is someone who's putting the same thought and level of care that I would for my own home products into something to sell to the public.
Yeah, and like you're saying about ingredient accessibility, it is true that when you are just an individual, maybe being an herbalist for yourself, your family, or your community, it doesn't really make sense for you to form a relationship with this incredible olive oil company that you have to buy 5 gallons of at a time and stuff like that. So that is, I totally understand that a lot of times people at home like need to order from certain places or pick up some olive oil at Costco, and that's totally fine. You're still going to get a beautiful medicine. But sometimes I do think that we get in this mindset of thinking that making things yourself is automatically going to be cheaper, when in all actuality, oh my God, if I were to just try to buy the smallest amount of every ingredient in one item that I make, I mean, unless you know that you're going to need it for the rest of your life, it doesn't really make sense. So
Yes.
I definitely feel that way too, where I love having relationships with other herbalists and people that make things that I don't make, because yeah, it's not only can be a lot of money, but a lot of time to try to make everything yourself. And that's
Exactly.
also kind of the beauty of being able to support other people, is maybe you try one of my teas like Crimson Moon or Mountain Mama. I always tell people, if Mountain Mama works for you, get yourself a big old bag of nettle, horsetail, alfalfa, raspberry leaf, and then you can just make yourself endless amounts of that infusion, you know? So it's kind of nice to be able to try things and then see how you feel about it. Also, on the note of ingredients, I've seen a lot more farms offering these like small herb CSAs, and I think that is so freaking cool.
I know. I solicit my local herb farmers all the time. I'm like, y'all need to start, growing more herbs. Like we have this need, and I don't want to order from, Mountain Rose or Amazon or anything like that. And if you're growing it and you're able to grow it for us.
Yes.
And and that's like the way that I'm building the local relationship that you've been able to cultivate as a big business owner. And then yeah, you're bringing in massive income for the farmers that you get your herbs from, and it works out.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your moon cycle sink was one of the first things that you ever made, but what is your favorite thing to make, like of the products that you make?
Um, let's see. I think probably as far as fun and
Mhm.
experimentational goes, which is something that I really, really love. And again, that comes from a lot of experimentation and failure and getting to know herbs and things individually, to where now I have the confidence to make, experiment with things. I love perfumery. I love making super unique scents. I was talking to my employee Mary about that the other day, that's been doing soaps for us, and talking about whether she wanted to start trying to make the scents, or at least the base scents. And we kind of came to the conclusion that the difference is, and the main reason why it's a little easier for me to make the scents, is because I have hundreds of scents and I already know what they smell like. If you don't know what all these things smell like, you're just kind of making guesses. And that's great when you're in the experimentational phase, which is where she's at. So we kind of came to the conclusion of her experimenting, and then I may just kind of like polish things off and finish stuff. So that said, I love experimentation, and it takes a while to get to a point of doing that confidently, especially in large batches, where if you F up, then it's very costly.
Dollars of yeah.
Yeah, it's scary. So I love making new products. Right now I'm working on our spring and summer seasonal products, and that is definitely when I'm the happiest, is like playing around with different things. But on like a day-to-day things that we make all the time kind of basis, teas and tinctures are my absolute favorite. And that comes from kind of my roots in this business and herbalism, where those used to be the only things that I did, and were always my favorite, because you are developing that relationship with those plants. You are spending so much time extracting it, whether you're doing like a double boiler, a dual extraction, using the blender, the folk method, tincturing things right in your garden or wherever you harvested it always feels really good. So getting to pull out all these beautiful freshly dried herbs from farms to mix our teas, or looking at all the gorgeous colors of our tinctures, those are like the usual faves.
Yeah, I appreciate what you said about experimentation being, coming with time, right? And I think that's what really goes into making unique and special products is the time that you took to teach yourself how to do it and to do it well. Um, and then once you've figured that out, right, and that's when the creativity can really thrive and bloom, is because you've got that part down,
Yes,
right?
that's
So
very
I
true.
think I made a lot of salves before I felt like, oh, this is a salve that I could share, with
Yeah.
my my clients, or as a doula, or my friends. And so that just comes with practice. And then also the another piece that I thought that I love that you mentioned is the sizing. So like I think one of the biggest mistakes that I ever first made when I was making a bunch of tinctures was making massive amounts of things that would just sit there. But it's so
Yeah.
exciting to work with the plants.
Yes.
And I had teachers that would say, don't make large amounts at first, but I'm like, I got this big old mason jar. Now
Yes.
I like legit, if I'm making nettle tincture, I'm making this much nettle
Yes.
tincture
Like
because
four
this is what,
ounces.
yeah. And so, um, yeah, just taking that pressure off yourself and really playing and working intuitively, I feel like leads to being an excellent formulator.
Yeah, and that can help you with that cost of experimentation. Like the first thing that I ever did to start experimenting and learning, I learned the plants around me first. And how I
Mhm.
would learn them is, let's say I'm looking at goldenrod. I might be looking at this patch of goldenrod that I'm about to intentionally harvest some of and asking myself, do I want to put you in alcohol or do I want to put you in oil? And a lot of
Mhm.
times I would do both to get to know the plant. But that said, I think you're right. A big mistake that a lot of people will make is they're looking at this massive patch of goldenrod. So they harvest
Mhm.
like 3 pounds, when in all
Mhm.
actuality, you need like this much to make
Mhm.
like a pint of alcohol and a pint of oil, which is already a lot, especially for just a family. But that's a great starting point, is to get maybe even those half pint jars and
Yeah.
just make a little alcohol infusion, a little oil infusion, and start to build your shelf
Yeah.
and experiment that way. So all the plants that I learned at first were things that already grow here, things like chickweed, cleavers, red clover, dead nettle, goldenrod, ironweed, lobelia. I mean, there's so many. And
Yeah.
that's a great way to get to learn formulation.
Okay, so keeping on the theme of, products that we love or don't love to make, what are the some of the most challenging products that you sell or make, I
Um,
guess?
Anything that requires water is super challenging because water is the host for bacteria. So if
Yeah.
you're again looking at an herb and going, how am I going to preserve you?
Mhm.
Alcohol or oil? That's typically the question. Because those are really great ways to preserve an herb for about a year before you work with it. Water is always going to introduce mold, bacteria, bad stuff. So
Mhm.
when you are making a cream, for example, I feel like a lot of times that's the first risky thing that a budding herbalist will make.
Mhm.
You don't want to use preservatives. So you read about Rosemary Gladstar's cream recipe, which is a great starting point. It doesn't use preservatives. However, it has water in it. So if
Mhm.
you're not using that within 1 month or freezing it, you really shouldn't be using it because it's harboring bacteria. And a lot of people don't think about that and they start making these water based creams with no preservatives. And because you can't see the bacteria, they're like, oh, I could sell these. But then, a couple months from now, people are dipping their fingers in it, et cetera. It's going to get moldy and it's just a whole mess. So, things with water take a real learning curve because you have to learn preservatives. And
Yeah.
oftentimes, you have to learn about emulsifiers because oil and water. So to be honest, after my first few failed cream experiments, I said, fuck water. I don't want to use water. I would rather use these whole plant extracts like oil and alcohol. That said, I have one recipe that uses water, and that is the main tamer. And I love that product, and so many other people do too. And it would not be the same without water, but it makes it a lot more challenging because it requires emulsification. And when you're emulsifying a huge batch of something, it is terrifying. And then, of course, it also requires a preservative and testing and all that kind of stuff, which, real quick, my biggest advice to anyone that is thinking about selling a recipe with water in it, even if you've done research and you found yourself a preservative, do not sell that item until you have sat with it and used it for at least 6 months, and get yourself some test strips and test it at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, etc. So you avoid making a colossal size mistake and sending out a bad product to a lot of people.
Yeah. So where did you learn about emulsifiers and preservatives and the resources? Like, how did you figure that out when you figured out this was something that you wanted to add to your herbal remedies?
So this is something that there's a lot more information about now. And so I do want to start by saying, if you are interested in skincare and formulating with emulsifiers and water and preservatives, please look up Formula Botanica School. If I could go back in time and go to that school, I would do it in a heartbeat. They are incredible. And that said, they have a lot of free YouTube videos if you want to check them out first. They might have been around when I started, but I was not aware of that. And so I learned through lots of different people's YouTube videos, as well as when you go to these websites to buy preservatives and emulsifiers, websites like Formulator Shop, Wholesale Depot, all these places. Typically, I think by law even, they have to have these links underneath them that's like what percentage to use it, how to use it, and even some example recipes. And so that can be really helpful too. But for me, it was a big old smorgasbord of whatever I could find online. And therefore, I did fail a lot. And I think that if I could have just simply gone to Formulator or Formula Botanica School, they have short courses. It's not like a big school commitment thing. That would have been incredible, especially if any of you have experimented with soap making. There's all these weird random like alchemy issues that can happen where you might be following the recipe perfectly, but the temperature in the room or the humidity in the room even can totally change the outcome. So being able to ask questions is key. And I never had anybody to ask questions with. So I did save a couple of links.
Yeah, I've seen them.
I think I can share
and then I have this
in the recording. So I'm just going to go ahead and put them there.
Okay. I have this question here. I'd love to know what to consider in terms of disclaimers needed on herbal product websites. I make oils, salves, tinctures, teas, body sprays, and more, and want to make sure I have proper disclaimers. So what would you say to the person?
This is an easy one because there's two kinds of questions I get about this. When people ask me about laws and GMPs and standard procedures and all that stuff, that is tricky because it's totally different state by state, business by business even. But this question is the same across the board. So again, I've got a link or two that I'm going to put in the comment section that I use. So there are FDA disclaimers that you have to have. So I'm going to put that FDA cosmetics labeling regulations, and this is more so for like cosmetic products like skincare and stuff. And then I'm also adding the American Herbalist Guild legal and regulatory FAQs, which is more for internal stuff like teas and tinctures and whatnot. There are a lot of, if you go to herb school, almost every herb school has a section on these things. And again, they can't tell you a ton because it depends on where you are, but they will share these types of resources. But it depends on the kinds of products that you're making. And it can really get as detailed or as not detailed as you, are comfortable making it. For example, when I was working out of my house, in a really small kitchen, in a really small room, I was doing a lot less sales and I was working under a minimal business activity license. And when you have a minimal activity business license, the same regulations as big businesses don't apply to you because obviously you don't have the same resources as them. But once you enter into a regular full-fledged business license, and once you're at the size where, you know, maybe you have a studio space or whatever, you do have to follow good manufacturing processes and you do have to have your own standard operating procedures. And I have a video on that on YouTube that's free for everybody and on my Instagram TV that kind of just talks about prompts that you should ask yourself, because again, it depends what kind of products you're making and selling and all that good stuff. But for the most part, if you've ever worked in a kitchen, you have to have those things in a kitchen too. Like if you're on a food line, for example, and maybe you have your backup of baked beans and your open baked beans. Well, obviously you want to make sure you're using the open first, and then you're pulling your backup, and then you're pulling the next backup from the fridge. And typically you will write the time that those came out of the oven on aluminum foil on the top. And then you will temp them before you serve them to make sure they're at the proper temperature. All of those things apply to your procedures in a kitchen making herbal products. And if the government were to look in on you, they just want to know that you have those systems in place. They want to know that you are regulating, what do you call it? Like use first kinds of things, having your dates in order, making sure things are, you know, if you're selling elderberry syrup, making sure that you're reaching that temperature where any like spores and bacteria and stuff is killed before bottling it. All those kinds of things, making sure that you have systems in place for hand washing, gloves, tying your hair back, etc. All things that would be important anywhere else where manufacturing was going on.
For sure. And then I have this question here. I'm thinking about making and selling salves and tinctures in the near future. How do you determine how to price each item in your shop in order to make a profit?
This is a great question. And I do also have a free video on this if you want more information. But this is a good question. That is, again, going to be really personal to the ingredients that you're buying, the time that's going into it, etc. I will say something very interesting happened to me this year. When I came up in herbalism, I was around a few other herbalists and, you know, people who were inspiring me. The community that I was in and was looking to was making sure their items were accessible first and foremost. And so when I came into herbalism, I wasn't even thinking about profiting. And that's not necessarily a good thing. That just wasn't something that I thought about until later. And whenever I would talk to my older peers about that, they would say things like, oh, there's no way you could ever actually pay yourself for the time that goes into this because people would never be able to afford it. And that is true, because think about if you are growing herbs in an herb garden, harvesting, cleaning, drying, infusing, straining, all of the things that go into one item, you could never get paid for all the time that goes into that unless you were charging several $100s for something. And I think that that's important to be mindful of going into an herbal business, because if you are the kind of person that's going to feel down in the dumps about the fact that your time isn't necessarily being fully compensated for, this might not be the best business for you to go into. A lot of people come into herbal business because they want to make these remedies for themselves and their families and break even, so they're not going broke making these things for themselves. That said, a big mistake that I made at first was, again, I was wild foraging a lot, I was growing a lot. So those herbs, because I wasn't paying for them, in my mind, did not have a value. Same with my time, because I wasn't paying myself, that time didn't have a value. So I was literally going, okay, this jar cost me $1.50, this label cost me $1, this beeswax, these oils cost me this much, so $10. And then it was like, no, I wasn't valuing any of the things that go into it. And energetically, that's not great. And also, the fact that I wasn't able to grow that way wasn't great either. So it wasn't really until I made that switch of sourcing my herbs and oils and alcohols and everything from great companies that actually pay fair wages and have these organic growing processes and stuff, where I was like, wow, the value of these things is exponential. And it also made it a little easier to look at all these invoices and break it down to a formula and then see, okay, this is actually costing me around $6 per bottle to make. So just those are just some things to start thinking about. For me, it also changed when I moved into an office space where I now had a whole nother set of rent, utilities, groceries, paying people, making sure that if a disaster were to happen, that my employees have some money to, get themselves through, as well as me. And, just so many other things come into play as you start to grow. And so now the pressure to make money on my products is so much more, especially when you do have to do all these things to upkeep your kitchen or your workspace to make sure you're using the right utensils and tools and have these regulations in place and whatnot. So look at what your overhead cost is. You do get to write off a home office. So if you are writing off your home office, what are you writing off? Because maybe you should start incorporating that into your cost. Are you writing off $150 a month? Because cool, there's your rent, maybe factor that in. And then looking at, just the cost of goods sold that's going into it, and insurance. Insurance is important.
Yeah. And that, it might not be the same for this person. I don't know if they're making them for, to sell just locally, or if they're, going to do a website and things like that. So yeah, it's a nuanced question, but then, if you're going to have a website, you got to include the maintenance of all those things into the herbal remedies that you're selling for the upkeep of it to make it worth, your time.
And then one more nuanced thing about that is, sometimes I feel like it might have been better to start out with a higher priced item so that as I grew, I wouldn't have to raise my prices. But I actually think that I earned the trust of my customer base that way, because they saw that my prices were growing as my business was growing. And so they're seeing, oh, that visually makes sense, Sure. But you want to factor in all those little things, taxes, like you said, subscriptions, websites, graphic design, all that stuff. It's hard.
Yeah. Or if you're doing that all yourself, then factoring in your labor for that too. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. This one kind of ties in, even though it's a big one. It says, it would be great to hear how you got into the herbal business. What was the event or series of events that made you decide how to grow and start the business? We kind of talked about that. And then they went on to say, I'd also love to know how she stays sane running a business and doing all of the marketing required to get seen on social media. And then I also want to tie in like how you deal with mimics, copycats, people stealing your formula. So the sanity aspect of it, I think, is important.
Okay, so we did talk a little bit about how I started in the business, and that's going to stem into the social media aspect, because I feel that I am a different situation than some people. Some people decide, I want to start an herbal business. I need to get the pretty photos and do this, this, and this. For me, it was not that way. I started out on social media, selling things to my local community, meeting with people one-on-one. So truly everything in my business has been very slow and very organic. So as far as the sanity aspect goes, I mean, social media was first for me. So that was at one point a source of exhaust, and that was just the process of me learning boundaries, which I think everyone would have to go through at some point when your account kind of makes that jump from like a couple hundred people to a couple thousand. And when you are showing up as a genuine person online, a lot of people like see you as very easy to access. So I will say starting a Patreon was kind of my first way of being like, hey, I put a lot of myself out there for free, a lot of information for free, but I do also have to make money. So here's a way that you can support me for as little as $3, you know, and that just felt so much better energetically and helped me to not feel totally depleted all the time. And then also just learning to say, hey, I'm actually not taking consultations right now, but here are some other herbalists that are, because there are some herbalists out there that only offer advice and don't offer products. And having a relationship with those people where you feel comfortable and trusting sending people to them is huge. So learning that you don't have to do everything, and that you don't have to just say no. You can say no, and here's somewhere you can go. Here's something you can do. Here's a resource for you, a book, my Patreon, a YouTube, etc. You know, just ways besides you personally that people can access. And then as far as the marketing, kind of the same thing. I never really had to stop and make a conscious decision of I need to market myself. Like that has been organic for me. And that said, my virtual assistant was looking at my statistics and she was like, you know, you may not have 250,000 followers like some people, but your engagement rate is insane for the size following that you have. And I really pride myself on that because it has been an entirely organic reach. And I am there as a person, not a business, if that makes sense. I'm there as a person that has a business. And so I think that rather than people just making a purchase, they're excited to support something, someone, a dream, someone that's paying reparations, that's consciously sourcing and hiring and knowing that their money is going to something so much more than the product that they're receiving. So I haven't had to get crazy with a lot of that. And then as far as the mimicking, copying, pulling inspiration, whatever you want to call it, that has been hard. It's gotten easier more recently. Farai has definitely helped me to practice non-attachment, and it's something that's very hard to do with things that you love, and your formulas become something that you love. They become something that you've spent so much time on, and to see them just so easily ripped and mimicked and made to look the same without all the work behind it is really hard to stomach. But I mean, honestly, this might not be the best way to deal with it, but I just have to look away. Like I might spend a moment in my feels diagnosing why it hurts, looking into like, you know, what is upsetting about this. And then I just kind of choose to look away. I might silence that person on my Instagram for a while so that it's not in my face. I hear a lot of people say it's always inspiring to like make more things and do better. For me, it's more just about, yeah, it hurts and I've got work to do kind of thing. So that I guess is how I deal with it.
Yeah, I love that idea of, you know, have the grief and then, unless it's like a direct infringement on, you know, something that you have personally created from your own library, then just letting just recognizing, you know, the work that you put into something, your essence, your spirit. And then what, I don't know what it was that I told you. It's like they're trying to copy your sauce, but they don't have the juice or something like that, you know,
Yeah.
just like recognizing that they people are going to do what they're going to do. And herbal remedy product making and things like that right now, especially with social media and marketing, it's hot. And I a lot of people can experience pressure because on Instagram they're like, if you're not making reels, your business is gonna fail, or and if you're not doing this and this. And I'm just like, I think those things are important, but what's gonna keep people sticking around to you, and your social media, is your authenticity, is the relationship that you have with these herbal remedies, is the stories you're sharing as you make these products, is your relationships with how, you know, with these herbal remedies. And nothing can take from that. Even if the person has more success, um they like your work and your relationship and your authenticity cannot be mimicked.
Yeah, and I think it's like if someone just simply wants an anti-inflammatory product, cool, they might buy your recipe from someone else for cheaper. But a lot of times what inspires someone to want to buy something is you discussing how you came into that formula, how it helped you or touched someone's life, and where those plants came from and the inspiration came from, because people want that too. We all want that, especially people that have less access to these beautiful connection, like these nature stories. And sometimes like a gorgeous herbal tea is the closest that they may be able to get in a day. And having a tea that is sourced from a farm that they know and a person that they know is more a moment of self-care than simply buying some tea on Amazon.
Yeah. So yeah, and I also think that when they've built a relation, you know, yeah, right. The whole point about authenticity and coming to social media to post your stories when you want to, and versus not on an algorithm based stuff like that. Um, it may not be the most effective way of getting your business out there, but if it aligns with your values, then that's one way to reduce stress, among other things like that.
So true.
All right. My last question for you, Tori, is if you could tell yourself one thing when you were first starting out selling herbal remedies, what would that be?
So I'm going to flip this question because my response is something that I already did.
Exactly.
And I've always say that I am so freaking grateful for the pace that I took coming into this. And so technically, if I could go back in time, I would be like, yes, keep doing what you're doing. Even if you feel less successful than other people or slower to grow than other people. So I'm just going to flip that into what my advice would be for other people starting out that are interested in making and possibly selling herbal products is really everything that we've talked about today, of taking it slow, building connections with your customer base, building connections with your suppliers, the herbs that you're working with. You really want to, excuse me, know each part of those things, or you're going to get blindsided and embarrassed at some point. And it's just got a lot less integrity. So take it slow. Don't compare yourself to other people. I know that's so much easier said than done, but you're oftentimes looking at people that were where you were at some point. Like I get
Exactly.
messages all the time from people that are like, you know, feeling bad about themselves because they're not where I'm at. But I mean, everything we've talked about today, I at one point had 200 followers and was making and selling one product at a time to my neighbors and had no fancy photos, no equipment, no website, none of that stuff. And I see a lot of herbalists that start out with a website, with a camera, with beautiful labels, and that's freaking awesome. So try not to feel like you need to go faster than you are, especially when it comes to releasing a product. Please, please, please do not make a product, make a batch of something, turn around and sell it immediately. You need to either try that product or send it to someone to try it. That's one of my favorite things to do when I make a new product, is to send it to my friends, to have them spend time with it. Yes. And it makes a huge difference, especially other skin types, other hair types. Like, do you really want to sell a product to a broad audience that only works for you? Probably not. You want people to like your products, you want them to work for them, you want word of mouth, you want good reviews. So make sure that the product that you're selling is worthy of those things, because sometimes you try it out and it's great, but it needs a tweak or two. So that would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, and surround yourself with people that are critical and honest, but love you and support you.
A Capricorn.
You know how we do.
Get yourself a Capricorn.
All right, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.